Hi everyone and welcome to Truth Over News. Last week we told you about some important new information that we'd uncovered. These new discoveries prompted us to take a harder look at events in the first 4 months of the COVID pandemic, creating an extensive timeline in the process. What we found surprised us. The sequence of events show a battle raging behind the scenes regarding the origins of COVID. The battle pitted Trump and a few members of his administration against most of the intelligence community, many of Trump's own advisors, and Anthony Fauci. There was also a subplot, an ongoing battle between Trump advisor Peter Navarro and Fauci. The two men clashed often, but Fauci was helped by the media and the intelligence community. However, with hindsight, both Trump and Navarro have been completely vindicated. Fauci has been completely discredited. And as jaded as we already are, we found ourselves taken aback at just how duplicitous Fauci really was. Of necessity, we're going to cover a number of dates, so we hope that you'll bear with us. On December 28, 2019, a Chinese scientist sought to publish the genetic profile of the coronavirus 2 weeks before China formally released the sequence. Lily Ren, a Chinese virologist, submitted the sequence to GenBank, the National Institutes of Health's genetic database. Shockingly, the NIH informed Ren that her submission lacked certain required technical information and would be deleted if this data was not provided. Ren never responded, and the sequence was deleted. As a December 21, 2023 letter from the Department of Health and Human Services notes, the submission was removed from the processing queue on January 16, 2020. Thus, the sequence was never made publicly available on GenBank. But it turns out that the sequence was incredibly important. Dr. Jesse Bloom analyzed the sequence and determined that this submission would have provided adequate information to initiate vaccine production in late 2019 if it had been made public. Bloom also noted that it invalidated China's claim that the causative agent of the Wuhan pneumonia outbreak still had not been identified near the end of the first week of January 2020. As a result of NIH's deletion of the sequence, the COVID sequence was not made public until January 11, 2020, and wasn't published on GenBank's site until the next day. Eddie Holmes, of Proximal Origin fame, posted the sequence information and was lauded by Wellcome Trust Jeremy Farrar for doing so. Left unsaid was a later admission from Holmes that he actually had the full sequence back on January 5th, but was instructed by China not to release the sequence until January 11th. A few days later, on February 1st, Holmes would tell Fauci's secret teleconference group that he was 80% sure that the virus came out of a lab. We've never gotten a convincing answer as to why NIH deleted the sequence without analysis, but the deletion by NIH conveniently gave China the very delay that they were demanding from Holmes. Meanwhile, crucial time and lives were lost in those early days. 1 day later, on January 13th, Fauci and Moderna quietly agreed to go ahead with manufacturing of the so-called mRNA COVID vaccines on a mass scale, despite claims from the World Health Organization that there was no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. Now, recall that Fauci was publicly claiming in February 2020 that the risk from COVID was minuscule, telling people to skip masks and just wash their hands. According to Fauci, the flu was a much bigger risk than was COVID. We feel this is worth highlighting as we've continuously found ourselves troubled by Fauci's early public COVID stance versus his private actions. But just as Fauci was publicly downplaying any risks, Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, was raising very real alarms about the COVID outbreak, and the two men would clash repeatedly over the next several months. On January 29th, the same day that Fauci joined the task force, Navarro drafted the first of 2 memos making the case for an immediate travel ban on China. In a second memo, Navarro warned COVID could infect as many as 100 million Americans and cause 1 million deaths. But there was a problem. Trump didn't see Navarro's memos, which were sent to the National Security Council. As we'll see, Trump wasn't made aware of them until April 6, when the media reported on the memos, which had suddenly been leaked. Now keep in mind that while all this was ongoing, Fauci was working in the background to establish the natural origin narrative that was crafted during his February 1st secret teleconference. As we've discussed many times, Fauci had a direct hand in the creation of proximal origin, which was used to discredit any discussion of a lab leak. Fauci had been busy with other things as well. On February 4, 2020, Fauci spoke with the head of the Chinese CDC, Gao Fu, to exchange information on the pandemic. The meeting had been facilitated by the dean of Harvard Medical School in a bizarre sequence of events that involved a pledge of $115 million to Harvard Medical School. China had official channels for communication. Why the need for a side channel into Fauci? Was China worried over a possible early determination of a lab leak by the U.S. that would implicate China for the COVID pandemic? As this was going on, the intelligence community was being pushed for answers. We now know that the FBI was told at the onset that COVID came from a lab leak, and they created a new task force that was investigating EcoHealth as being the entity behind the creation of the COVID virus no later than early April, but more likely in March 2020. This information came from Richard Ebright, a famous molecular biologist, who was interviewed by the FBI's task force in April and May of 2020 to help the FBI understand the intricate details contained within the EcoHealth work that was funded by Fauci and the NIH. For reasons that remain unknown, the FBI's task force would be disbanded in late May or June 2020. As the FBI was investigating EcoHealth, an internal State Department analysis was drafted regarding the possible origins for COVID. The analysis concluded that a leak from the Wuhan lab likely caused the pandemic. The memo also noted that all other proposed theories are likely to be a decoy. The state memo should have destroyed the natural origin narrative, but Fauci, with help from the intelligence community, kept the natural origin narrative alive and made any discussion of a lab leak impossible. On April 4, 2020, during a Saturday meeting of the COVID task force, Fauci and Navarro sparred over the promotion of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID. Fauci had already disparaged the use of hydroxychloroquine during a March 20th press conference, and he would do so again. According to accounts of the meeting, Navarro began passing out studies touting the drug's effectiveness. Fauci pushed back, claiming there was only anecdotal evidence that hydroxychloroquine worked against the coronavirus. Apparently, things got quite contentious. Navarro was right, and Fauci was later proven wrong. Even the NIH now admits that hydroxychloroquine can be effective as a treatment for COVID. But that didn't stop the media from ridiculing Trump at the time, even as Fauci continued to actively undercut him.
Is there any evidence to suggest that, as with malaria, it might be used as a prophylaxis against COVID-19?
No, the answer is no, and the evidence that you're talking about, John, is anecdotal evidence.
Why not just let the science speak for itself? Why are you promoting this drug?
I'm not. I'm just saying very simply, I'm not at all. I'm not. Look, you know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to save lives.
You come out here every day, right, sir, talking about the benefits of hydroxychloroquine.
I want them to try it, and it may work and it may not work. But if it doesn't work, it's nothing lost by doing it, nothing.
And would you also weigh in on this issue of hydroxychloroquine? What do you think about this, and what is the medical evidence?
That question?
Yeah. Well,
maybe 15 times. You don't have to ask.
He's your medical expert, correct?
He's answered that question 15 times.
Any and all of the randomized placebo-controlled trials, which is the gold standard of determining if something is effective, none of them had shown any efficacy for hydroxychloroquine.
On Monday, April 6, following the confrontation with Fauci, Navarro's memos were suddenly leaked to both Axios and the New York Times, and they were portrayed as warnings that Trump ignored. Unfortunately for Trump, Navarro's memos had been held at the National Security Council level and never made their way to Trump. Simultaneously with the memo leak, the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services abruptly issued an unexpected report that described a dire situation for hospitals, frontline doctors, and medical staff. This report had a likely target, Peter Navarro, who had recently assumed responsibility for supply chain issues within the medical system. The timing of these events, coming directly after Fauci's confrontation with Navarro, raise obvious questions as to their source. The battles continued. The very next day, on April 7th, Trump sent a tweet stating the WHO really blew it and said he would be looking into their actions. Trump was right. The first WHO report claimed that COVID-19 is a zoonotic virus, a natural virus that jumped from animals to humans at the Wuhan market. The possibility of a lab leak wasn't even mentioned. It was a fabrication designed to appease China. It also aligned with Fauci's narrative. On the same day, acting DNI Rick Grinnell convened a review of intelligence officials on April 7th to see whether the agencies could reach a consensus. The officials determined that at least so far they could not. It's unclear if Trump's tweet prompted that review, but the word consensus is important because, as we noted earlier, the FBI was already aware a lab leak was highly likely and was actively investigating EcoHealth in real time. Although the intelligence community refused to provide a consensus opinion, Trump began to hit more strongly at a leak from the Wuhan lab. Indeed, on April 15, 2020, in response to a question from Fox's John Roberts, Trump seemed to suggest that COVID indeed came from a Chinese lab.
Multiple sources are telling Fox News today that the United States government now has high confidence that while the coronavirus is a naturally occurring virus, it emanated from a virology lab in Wuhan, that because of lax safety protocols, an intern was infected, who later infected her boyfriend, and then went to the wet market in Wuhan, where it began to spread. Does that correspond with what you have heard from officials?
Well, I don't want to say that, John, but I will tell you more and more we're hearing the story, and we'll see.
Trump's comments contrasted with his military officials. On April 14th, Joint Chiefs Mark Miley told reporters that, "I would just say at this point it's inconclusive, although the weight of evidence seems to indicate natural." 2 days later, Defense Secretary Mark Esper told NBC that a majority of the views right now is that it is natural, that it was organic. Trump would continue to push a lab leak, but Fauci was about to push back. On April 17th, Trump told reporters that in regards to a lab leak, "We're looking at it. A lot of people are looking at it. It seems to make sense. There's a lot of investigation going on, and we're going to find out." But Fauci responded by claiming that COVID had a natural origin, citing the fraudulent proximal origin paper as proof of his claim. Fauci even pretended that he didn't know who the authors were, despite having directed them to write it. It was a crucially deceptive moment in the creation of the natural origin narrative.
Investigation into whether the virus escaped from this lab in Wuhan. How active is that, and when do you expect
We're
to hear?
looking at it. A lot of people are looking at it. It seems to make sense. They talk about a certain kind of bat, but that bat wasn't in that area. If you can believe this, that's what they're down to now is bats. But that bat is not in that area. That bat wasn't sold at that wet zone. It wasn't sold there. That bat is 40 miles away. So a lot of strange things are happening, but there is a lot of investigation going on, and we're going to find out.
This virus, what are the prospects of that?
There was a study recently that we can make available to you where a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve. And the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available to you.
Despite Fauci's public deception, Trump abruptly cut all funding to EcoHealth on April 26, 2020. Although Fauci undercut Trump a few months later by quietly providing new funding to EcoHealth. Against this dueling backdrop, another crucial event occurred. An April 28, 2020 article reported on the State Department memo, noting that a Wuhan laboratory is the most likely source of the COVID-19 outbreak, according to U.S. government analysis. The article also included direct quotes from the then non-public State Department memo. The article should have discredited the natural origin narrative before it really took hold. But that possibility was almost immediately derailed by the intelligence community, who seemingly rushed to counter the reporting of the State Department memo. In an April 29, 2020 email, acting DNI Rick Grinnell discussed the pending statement, asking, "Who was writing the IC-wide statement that redacted suggested we do in the Oval? We agreed to write a statement for the IC to all sign, and it would say we are down to 2 options for COVID." We don't yet know who suggested that the statement be written, but we do know that it was formally issued the very next day. On April 30th, 2020, the DNI's office issued an intelligence community statement on the origins of COVID, which made the crucial claim that the intelligence community concurs with the wide scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified. The IC statement was used to push back on any and all lab leak theories, just as the intelligence community knew it would be. It also completely buried any further reporting on the State Department analysis. It's also worth noting that the report was complete fiction. There was no widespread scientific consensus at that time, and we now have proof that COVID was both man-made and genetically modified. But at the time, the IC statement worked. Indeed, more than a year later, a follow-up August 2021 IC report still promoted a natural origin. But there was another problem as well. It appears that nobody, including Grinnell, told Trump the IC's assessment was coming or what it would say. We know this because Trump appeared to have been totally blindsided by its release during a live press conference that evening. Trump had been building towards a definitive statement on a lab leak, and it almost appeared that someone knew in advance what Trump intended to say and had taken steps to counter him. Despite media ridicule towards the end of the clip, Trump did confirm that he'd personally seen evidence that COVID originated at the Wuhan lab. But his claims were totally discredited by the IC statement, and the media had a field day. The media would continue to use the intelligence community statement as proof that COVID had a natural origin. It's possible that Grinnell was tricked by the intelligence community, or was simply naive regarding the impact from the language within the statement. But we struggle to explain why Trump was left exposed and totally unprepared for its release.
The Director of National Intelligence today put out a statement saying that they believe it was naturally occurring, it was not man-made. But
Who is that? Who is that said that?
the Office of the Director of
Yeah,
National
but
Intelligence.
who in particular? Who was the man that made that
It
statement?
was a statement that the ODNI...
Oh, he would know that, huh? National Intelligence. So we'll see.
That would be your
We're gonna
Director of
see.
National Intelligence.
No,
Rick Grinnell
I
was sitting there.
think it's, I mean, you'd have to tell me who specifically, who made the statement.
The statement was just put out under the Office of the
Okay,
ODNI.
we'll see. I mean, I have to see the statement, I just haven't seen it.
But the question I had was, have you seen anything at this point
Because
that
we're
gives...
looking at that, John, separately from,
But
we're looking at exactly where it came from, who it came from, how it happened, separately and also scientifically. So we're going to be able to find
and
out.
my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
This was the moment Fauci was waiting for. During a lengthy May 4th interview with National Geographic, Fauci claimed there was no scientific evidence the coronavirus was made in a Chinese lab. Fauci told Nat Geo that COVID could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated. Everything strongly indicates that the virus evolved in nature. Fauci even dismissed the idea of accidental escape from a lab. Notably, just 3 months earlier, 4 NIH-funded scientists privately told Fauci the virus almost certainly came from a lab. Rather than investigate, the media celebrated Fauci for standing up to Trump. Although Trump has been vindicated and most now view Fauci as a fraud, Fauci's subterfuge worked at the time. It became almost impossible to discuss any theory that deviated from a natural origin. Scientists bent the knee to Fauci and the deep pockets of the NIH. Trump was castigated by the media. Censorship was rampant, and the DNI's intelligence community statement on the origins of COVID helped to make it all possible. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Truth Over News.